It was a particularly frosty January morning in Anchorage. The thermometer outside my office window read -32 degrees Fahrenheit, and the sky was covered with leaden clouds that heralded another snowfall. I adjusted the heavy portrait of my father that hung behind my desk. He'd been mayor of this town 20 years ago, and always said that Alaska tests people's mettle every single day. My secretary, Astrid Colburn, brought me coffee at 7 a.m. sharp as usual. She had worked at City Hall longer than I could remember, and was one of the few people I trusted unconditionally. "Good morning, Mr. Thornton. Overnight incident summary and the latest press." Astrid placed a file folder and the latest issue of the Anchorage Daily News on the desk. "Thank you, Astrid. How's your son doing? I hear he got into medical school?" "Yeah, in Seattle. Really miss him." She smiled slightly and adjusted her thin, silver-rimmed glasses. I opened a folder of reports when my deputy, Reed Preston, literally flew into the office. His usually immaculate suit was wrinkled and a look of worry frozen on his face. "Landon, we have a fire in the historic district. The old Fitzgerald's bookstore is burning and the fire has spread to neighboring buildings." I instantly rose from the table, slipping my coat on as I went. My pistol holster rested on my shoulder, an old habit from my days in the prosecutor's office. You can't go out into a city like ours unprepared. "Astrid, cancel all appointments. Reed, call emergency services. I'm on my way." My black SUV sped down the snowy streets with confidence. I didn't need a navigator. I knew every corner of this town. As I drove past the old post office building, I noticed a group of women talking animatedly about something. One of them gave my car a long look, and I involuntarily recalled a recent conversation with Marcus Cavendish, chief of police and an old friend of mine. "People talk, Landon," he said then, looking into his whiskey glass. "You know how it is in small towns." I pushed those thoughts away. Now was not the time to think about gossip and rumors. The town needed its mayor. From far away, I could see a column of black smoke rising above the historic 19th century buildings. Fire trucks surrounded the block, their red flashing beacons reflected in the frozen windows of the neighboring houses. The temperature was so low that the water from the sprinklers turned to ice when it barely touched the ground. The fire chief, Harry Wilcox, met me at the cordon. "Mr. Mayor, the situation is critical. The fire is spreading faster than we expected. These old buildings are like matchboxes." "How many people have been evacuated?" 17 people from adjoining houses. 2 with signs of smoke poisoning are already in the hospital. Mr. Fitzgerald, he's refusing to leave, trying to save his books," I cursed to myself. Old Man Fitzgerald, the bookstore owner, was an urban legend. His establishment had operated in Anchorage for over 50 years, and he knew the stories of every family in town. Hooding my coat, I headed toward the police cordon. The frost burned my face, and the smoke ate my eyes. Marcus Cavendish, who was coordinating the police action, nodded at me. "You shouldn't go in there, Landon. Let the professionals do their job." "Fitzgerald's in there, Marcus. You know that stubborn old man." I moved forward, feeling the icy wind chill through my bones. Flames were shooting out of the door of the store, and black smoke was billowing from the broken second-story windows. Old Man Fitzgerald was bent over carrying out armfuls of books, his gray hair covered with ashes. "George!" I shouted. "We've got to get out of here. The building could collapse any minute." "Mr. Thornton," he coughed. "All the history of our town is here. First editions, rare books." I ran up to him, grabbed him by the shoulders. "George, think of Mary. What would happen to your granddaughter if something happened to you?" It worked. The old man allowed himself to be led out of the burning building. At that moment, there was a deafening crack as part of the roof collapsed inward, sending a shower of sparks into the sky. The next 4 hours became a never-ending nightmare for me. Firefighters fought the blaze, social services set up warming stations for evacuees, and the police cordoned off several blocks. I coordinated the actions of all services, held an emergency meeting with the city council by phone, and spoke to the press. It wasn't until late afternoon that the fire was localized. I stood by my car, staring at the blackened walls of historic buildings. Reed handed me a thermos of hot coffee. "Tough day, boss, but it could have been worse. No one was seriously hurt." "Yeah, it could have." I took a sip of the scalding drink. Organize a press conference for tomorrow and gather information about housing options for the affected families. By the way, where are the documents on the reconstruction of the historic district? Your wife has them. You put her in charge of the project. I froze. Indeed, Evelyn was on the Historic Preservation Commission. It was her idea to renovate the old buildings, to turn the neighborhood into a tourist attraction. Now those plans would have to be reconsidered. The phone in his pocket vibrated. A message from Evelyn. Saw the news. Are you okay? I'll cook your favorite steak for dinner. I didn't bother replying. Every conversation we'd had lately had been harder and harder for me. Something subtly changed, as if an invisible wall had grown between us. Or maybe it had always been there and I was just now starting to notice it. Landon, Marcus called out to me. Got a minute? I nodded and we stepped back to his police car. Preliminary theory is a short circuit, he said as he lit a cigarette. But that's not what I wanted to talk about. Listen, about those rumors. Not now, Mark. I held up my hand, stopping him. We've got half the city without power, the historic district in ruins, and 17 people homeless. Let's deal with the problems as they come. He nodded, but I could see the worry in his eyes. Marcus knew me too well. We'd been friends since high school. Already in the car, I looked at myself in the rearview mirror. Tired face, gray hair on my temples, wrinkles around my eyes. 41 years old wasn't much for the mayor of a growing city, but sometimes I felt much older, especially on days like today. Turning the heater on full blast, I pulled onto the main street. The snow had intensified, turning the city into a blurry white haze. Somewhere out there, in that shroud of snow, lurked the truth about my family life, and part of me didn't want to recognize it, but the city lived its life, despite my personal problems. As I drove past an affected neighborhood, I saw volunteers handing out hot tea to firefighters. An elderly couple hugged each other by the ambulance, wrapped in a blanket. Local TV reporters were reporting against a backdrop of smoking ruins. I was the mayor of this town, and right now, that was more important than anything else. I got home at midnight. Our 2-story house on the edge of town was covered in snowdrifts. Only the narrow path to the porch had been cleared, which meant Evelyn had called a snowplow. The light was on in the kitchen window, casting a yellowish glare on the snow. I stood in the car for a few minutes, gathering my thoughts. My clothes still smelled like smoke. My throat was scratchy, and my mind was reeling with fragments of today's conversations and anxious thoughts. The numbers on the dashboard flickered. -27 Fahrenheit. The hallway smelled of roast meat and rosemary. Evelyn had indeed cooked the steak as promised. I hung up my coat, threw off my heavy winter boots. The pistol holster went into the safe, another habit developed over the years. Landon? Her voice came from the kitchen. I'll heat up dinner. She stood at the stove in her favorite cream-colored cashmere sweater, her hair gathered into a careless bun. 10 years ago, I fell in love with her just like that. Homely, cozy, with that special half-smile of hers. Now, at the sight of my wife, I felt only a muffled ache somewhere under my ribs. You look tired. Evelyn set a plate in front of me. I've been following the news. Terrible tragedy with the bookstore. Yeah, Fitzgerald almost died trying to save his books. I mechanically sliced into my steak, though I didn't feel like eating at all. By the way, where are the documents for the redevelopment of the historic district? In my office. I was just working on the project. She sat down across from me with her hands around her teacup. I'll bring them to City Hall tomorrow morning. There was a heavy silence. Outside the window, the wind howled, swaying the bare branches of an old maple tree. It was the maple we'd planted the first year after we were married. Evelyn had said then that she wanted it to grow with our family. There's a rumor going around town, I finally said, setting my fork aside. She froze before bringing the cup to her lips. What rumors? You know what rumors, Evie. Her hands trembled faintly. I used to call her Evie only in moments of special tenderness. Now the nickname sounded like an accusation. People are always making things up, she tried to smile, but the smile came out strained. You know how it is in small towns, especially when it comes to the mayor's family. Stop it. I looked her straight in the eye. Marcus says you've been seen with different men. At a coffee shop. At the mall. At that new restaurant by the lake. Evelyn stood up impulsively, walked across the kitchen. Her heels tapped on the tile sharply, nervously. Why was she still wearing shoes? She'd always changed into house slippers before. I'm working on a remodeling project. Her voice sounded too flat. Naturally, I have to meet all sorts of people. Contractors, architects, historical society representatives. At 8 o'clock at night? At a restaurant? She turned around sharply. What do you want to hear, Landon? That I'm cheating on you? That all this gossip is true? I remained silent, looking at the untouched steak. Evelyn always cooked them perfectly, crusted just the way I liked it. Right now, the meat seemed flavorless. Okay. She leaned against the kitchen countertop as if looking for support. I'll admit it. I've been flirting. Maybe more than I should have. With a couple men in town. It was stupid and irresponsible. With whom, exactly? What difference does it make? Nothing happened, Landon. Just conversations, smiles, maybe a couple touches. I felt lonely. You're always busy with city stuff, constant meetings, appointment. I'm doing my job. What about our marriage? That's a job too, Landon. When was the last time we went out together? When we weren't talking about city issues or remodeling. She was right, and that made it hurt even more. For the past few years, the city had really been taking up all my time. Endless projects, crises, political games. I'd become so immersed in my role as mayor that I'd almost forgotten my role as a husband. I love you, Evelyn said quietly, stepping closer. I swear it wasn't anything serious, and it won't be. I was stupid. I wanted attention, compliments. I'm sorry. She knelt down next to my chair, taking my hands in hers. Her fingers were cold despite the heat from the stove. Give me a chance to make things right. I promise, from now on, a clean slate. No more seeing each other alone, no more flirting. Just you and me. I stared at her face, so beautiful, so familiar. The small mole under her right eye, the faint wrinkle at the corner of her lips when she smiled. 10 years together. 10 years of morning kisses, shared plans, little fights and reconciliations. I want to believe you, I finally utter. So believe me. She pressed her cheek against my hand. I know I don't deserve your trust right now, but I'll prove I'm worthy of it. Outside the window, the snow continued to fall. Huge flakes swirled in the light of the street lamp, as if trying to tell me something. Somewhere in the distance, a police siren howled, a common sound for a city at night. Go take a shower. Evelyn stood up, adjusting her sweater. You still smell like smoke, and I'll make some fresh coffee. I nodded mechanically and headed for the bathroom. Under the hot jets of water, my thoughts finally began to clear. Maybe she really is telling the truth. Maybe it wasn't as bad as the town gossipers were whispering. When I returned to the kitchen, I found Evelyn doing the dishes. She was humming something to herself, an old habit that used to always make me smile. Your coffee, she nodded at the cup without turning around. No sugar, just the way you like it. I took a sip. The flavor was perfect. Another little thing she'd remembered all these years later. Evie. Yeah? It's my fault, too. You're right. I got too caught up in work. She turned around, wiping her hands with a towel. We both made mistakes, but now we have a chance to make things right. Just trust me, okay? I nodded, feeling the knot in my chest loosen a little. Evelyn came over and hugged me from behind, nuzzling her nose into my wet post-shower hair. You know what I was thinking? Maybe we should take a little vacation. When the fire situation settles down, just you and me somewhere away from all this city stuff. Sounds like fun. I covered her hands with mine. But first we need to deal with the aftermath of today's fire and the remodeling project. Of course. She kissed my cheek lightly. Work first, Mr. Mayor. I heard some odd note in her voice, but I was too exhausted to analyze it now. It had been an incredibly long day, and fatigue was finally starting to take its toll. Shall we go to bed? Evelyn suggested. Busy day tomorrow. As I walked up the stairs to the bedroom, I thought about how I wanted to believe her. I really do. But something inside me, some sixth sense, kept setting off alarm bells. After all, I'd been a prosecutor long enough to know. People rarely admit to everything at once. They usually give away a small part of the truth, hoping it will be enough. But today I decided to put those thoughts on hold. Evelyn's right. Tomorrow's going to be a tough day. I have to deal with the aftermath of the fire, meet with the burn victims, talk to the press. The city needs its mayor, and personal problems. Well, they're not going anywhere. We'll still have time to figure it out. As I fell asleep, I could hear Evelyn tossing and turning on her side of the bed. We used to always fall asleep snuggled together. When did that change? And more importantly, why hadn't I noticed this change before? 2 weeks had passed since our conversation with Evelyn. The city was slowly recovering from the fire in the historic district, and our family life was thawing. Evelyn was really trying, making breakfast in the mornings, inquiring about my affairs, sending sweet messages in the middle of the day. That frosty Saturday morning, I woke up to the smell of freshly brewed coffee and bacon. It was snowing outside the window, and the thermometer read -23. Pulling on a warm robe, I went down to the kitchen. Evelyn was at the stove, humming an old Sinatra song. She was wearing the same blue dress I'd given her last Christmas. An odd choice for homemade clothes. "Good morning," she smiled, placing a plate of scrambled eggs in front of me. "I thought we could go for a walk today. The weather seems to be getting better." I looked out the window where the wind was bending the tops of the fir trees. "You call that good weather?" "For Alaska, quite." She sat across from me with a cup of herbal tea. "Remember when it was -40 the first year we lived here? That was some weather." I remembered. Back then, Evelyn had just moved with me from Seattle, where she'd grown up. I remember her complaining about the cold, wrapping herself in 5 layers of clothes, and me teaching her how to properly heat the fireplace. Now she had learned to love that rugged Alaskan beauty. At least that's how it seemed to me. "I have a surprise for you." I pulled a small velvet box from my robe pocket. "I was going to give it to you for your birthday, but I think I'll do it now." Evelyn opened the box and froze. Inside were vintage sapphire earrings. I'd found them at the same antique shop where I'd bought her engagement ring 10 years ago. "Landon," her voice trembled. "They're beautiful. Like your eyes." I took her hand across the table. "Will you try them on?" She put the earrings on, turning toward the window so I could get a better look at them. In the morning light, the sapphires seemed almost as deep as her eyes. Almost. "Thank you." Evelyn came over and kissed my cheek. She smelled like jasmine perfume. Strange, she used to prefer vanilla. After breakfast, we actually went for a walk. The city seemed frozen under a blanket of snow. Rare passers-by hurried about their business, wrapped in scarves and hiding their noses in their collars. We walked along the embankment, where the icy wind from the bay was chilling to the bone. "How's the renovation project coming along?" I asked when we stopped at the observation deck. "Slower than I'd like." Evelyn adjusted her scarf. "A lot of things had to be revised after the fire, but I'm meeting with the architects next week." Something in her tone made me wary. With whom, exactly? "The firm of Bryce Hollingsworth," she said nonchalantly, as if in passing. "They have a lot of experience in restoring historic buildings." Bryce Hollingsworth, owner of the Northern Lights Inn and several other businesses in town. I'd met him at business events. A tall, trim man in his early 40s, with impeccable manners and a reputation as a successful businessman. "You didn't tell me you were working with his firm." "Did I? I must have forgotten to mention." Evelyn turned away, pretending to gaze out at the frozen bay. "They won the bid back last month." I was about to ask something else, but that's when the phone rang. "Marcus." "Sorry, gotta take this," I said to Evelyn. "Yes, Marcus?" "Landon, we've got a homeless problem at the old shipyard. It looks like they've set up some sort of camp there. In this temperature, it could end badly. Be right there." I turned to my wife. "I'm sorry, darling. Duty calls." "Of course," she smiled, but the smile wasn't genuine. "The city needs its mayor." I kissed her goodbye and hurried to the car. Already starting the engine, I saw in the rearview mirror as she pulled her cell phone out of her coat pocket. Something about the gesture struck me as odd, but I couldn't figure out what it was. The homeless problem took up most of the day. By evening, I came home completely exhausted. Evelyn was sitting in the living room with her laptop, looking through some paperwork. "Hungry?" she asked, without taking her eyes off the screen. "I made lasagna." "Thanks, but I had a snack at the office." I sat down in my chair by the fireplace. "What are you reading?" "Project documentation." She slammed the laptop shut a little too quickly. "Nothing interesting." We sat in cozy silence, broken only by the crackling of the logs in the fireplace. Everything seemed to be the same as before. The two of us, our home, the usual evening routine. But something was subtly different. It was as if an invisible shroud of unspoken words hung between us. "I'm so glad we're spending time together again," Evelyn said suddenly. "You know, I've really missed it. Us." She moved over to me on the arm of the chair, ran her hand through my hair. Her new earrings shimmered in the firelight, casting blue highlights on the wall. "I missed you too," I replied, pulling her closer. We made love that night, for the first time in a long time. It was strange, almost like being with a stranger. Evelyn was gentle, passionate, but something wasn't right. Maybe it was the new perfume, or the way she looked away when I tried to look into her eyes. Later, when she fell asleep, I lay awake for a long time, listening to her breathing. From the ajar window came the howl of a blizzard. Heavy snowfall was promised for tomorrow. Somewhere in the house, an old clock ticked, counting down the minutes of this deceptively calm night. Before falling into a restless sleep, I remembered what had seemed to me a strange afternoon on the boardwalk. Evelyn had reached for the phone with her left hand. She'd always been right-handed. That day began as usual. I woke up at 6 in the morning. Evelyn was still asleep. She'd been staying up late lately, staying up late working on project documentation, she said. I tried to ignore it, but the worm of doubt was gnawing at me. I went down to the kitchen and turned on the coffee maker. It was dark outside the window. The sun rises late in the winter in Alaska. The thermometer read -25. While the coffee brewed, I watched the morning news on my tablet. The city council was supposed to approve a budget today for the revitalization of the historic district. Evelyn came downstairs just as I was about to leave. She was wearing the same cream sweater she'd been wearing the day we'd talked about the rumors. For some reason, it made me tense up. "Leaving already?" She reached for the coffee pot. "I have an important meeting with the contractors today. I'll be back late." "With the Hollingsworth crew?" "Yes." She averted her gaze. "And with representatives from the Historical Society?" I nodded, buttoning my coat. The pistol holster rested habitually on my shoulder. Evelyn had once asked why I carried a gun, since I wasn't a prosecutor anymore. "Old habit," I replied. "In fact, in this harsh land, it's best to be ready for anything." There was a mountain of paperwork waiting for me at City Hall. Astrid, impeccably organized as always, arranged them in order of importance. "Mr. Thornton, there's a press conference on the reconstruction at 10 o'clock, she reminded me, adjusting her glasses. "And Chief Cavendish called, asking me to call you back." I dialed Marcus's number as soon as I was free. "Landon," my friend's voice sounded strained. "Got a minute? We need to talk." "What's wrong?" "Not on the phone. Meet me at Joe's after work?" Joe's was an old bar on the edge of town where Marcus and I sometimes went for a drink, a place where we could talk quietly. The day dragged on endlessly. Press conference, meetings with contractors. I caught myself constantly checking my phone, waiting for messages from Evelyn. Usually she wrote several times a day. Today, silence. At 6 p.m., I closed the office and headed to Joe's. Marcus was already waiting for me at the far table, an untouched glass of whiskey in front of him. "You look tired," he remarked as I sat down. "Thanks for the compliment. What did you want to talk about?" Marcus was quiet, twirling the glass in his hands. "About your wife." I felt my insides clench. "We've already discussed that. She admitted to some innocent flirting. We're working on a relationship." "Landon." He stepped forward. You're my friend, and I can't keep quiet. My guys, they've seen her at the Northern Lights Inn several times in the last few weeks. She's got meetings with Hollingsworth on the remodeling project. In hotel rooms? I clenched my fists under the table. What are you saying? You know what I'm trying to say yourself, Marcus sighed. Look, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe things aren't what they seem. But you have to know. I got home late. The light was on in the living room, but Evelyn had already gone up to the bedroom. I poured myself a whiskey, sat in the chair by the fireplace. Marcus's words rattled around in my head, keeping me awake. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed something on the couch. Evelyn's purse. She never left it downstairs. My hands acted as if on their own. Inside were the usual feminine little things. A cosmetic bag, a wallet, a bunch of keys, and a cell phone. Not her usual iPhone, but another, a simple folding phone. I turned it on. The screen flashed, asking for a PIN code. 4 digits. I tried our wedding date. Wrong. Her birthday. Wrong again. The date we first met? No. I stared at the flickering screen for a minute. Then I dialed Marcus's number. I need help, I said as soon as he answered. Unofficially. Phone? Yes. Can you trace calls and messages? There was a pause. Landon, are you sure you want to know? I looked up the stairs leading to the bedroom. It was quiet upstairs. No, but I have to. Bring it by tomorrow morning. Just be prepared for any outcome. I put the phone back in my purse, exactly as it lay. The whiskey in the glass had warmed, but I took a sip anyway. There were pictures of us on the mantelpiece, the honeymoon in Hawaii, the hike in the mountains, the Christmas dinner last year. In all of them, Evelyn was smiling that special smile I loved so much. When I went up to the bedroom, she was already asleep. In the moonlight streaming through the curtains, her face seemed serene. I lay down beside her, trying not to wake her. All night I listened to her breathing, trying to detect signs of pretense. I thought back to the last few weeks, her sudden attention, her unexpected passion, her new perfume. All the things I'd taken for signs of a budding relationship now seemed fake, contrived. Toward morning, I dozed off. I woke up to the sound of the door closing. Evelyn had already left. Freshly brewed coffee and a note were waiting in the kitchen. Meeting with contractors. I'll be back late. Love you. The handwriting was a little jagged, like she was in a hurry. I took my phone out of her purse and drove to the police station. Marcus was waiting for me in his office. Give me a couple hours, he said, taking the phone. Take care of business for now, and keep your cool. City Hall was jammed. The budget hearings had started. I sat in my chair, mechanically nodding, signing documents, answering questions. But my thoughts were far away. At 2 o'clock, Marcus called. Come over. His voice sounded strange, and I realized that the news would be bad. On the way to the station, I stopped at a stoplight. In a neighboring car, a young couple was chatting merrily about something. The woman was laughing with her head thrown back, just like Evelyn used to laugh at my jokes. When had it all gone wrong? Marcus's office had always seemed too small for a man of his stature. Now that we were sitting across from each other, separated by a desk with printouts spread out on it, the tightness felt especially acute. You should know, Marcus said slowly, choosing his words carefully. Everything I'm about to show you is unofficial. As each other, not as chief of police to the mayor. I nodded silently, my throat constricted, as if I already knew what I was about to hear. The call started 3 months ago. He slid the first printout toward me. Infrequent at first, then more and more frequent, always from the same number. I looked through the list of calls. Some lasted a few minutes, others over an hour. Late nights, early mornings. The very hours when Evelyn was supposedly working on a remodeling project. The number is registered to Bryce Hollingsworth. Marcus put the next sheet in front of me. But that's not all, there are messages. I started reading and felt anger rise to my throat. Hundreds of messages, intimate details, meeting plans. Northern Lights, their special password for hotel dates. Photos that another man's wife should never send. Miss you. Can't wait to see you. Yesterday was incredible. Every word was like a stabbing blow. The last message was last night, Marcus said quietly. They arranged to meet today, 2 o'clock, room 312. I glanced at my watch, 1 hour 50. The blood pounded in my temples. Landon, Marcus put a hand on my shoulder. Whatever you're planning right now, don't do it. He's sleeping with my wife. My voice sounded hoarse, like a stranger's. In his fucking hotel, while I'm working for the good of the city, while I'm trying to save our marriage. I wasn't finished. Abruptly, I stood up, knocking over my chair. My hands trembled. You're the mayor of the city. Marcus stood up as well. Think about the consequences, about your reputation. Screw my reputation. I snatched the printouts from the table, crumpled them up, shoved them into the inside pocket of my coat. The pistol holster seemed suddenly especially heavy. I'm coming with you. Marcus grabbed his jacket. No. Then I'll have you arrested. Right now. We stared at each other for a few seconds. Marcus was half a head taller than me, and now he was using every inch of that advantage. Okay, I finally muttered. Let's go. The Northern Lights Inn was located in the heart of the city. A 5-story glass and stone building built in a modern style, but with elements of traditional Alaskan architecture. I'd been here for business meetings, fundraisers, city events. Damn, Hollingsworth has always been an impeccable host. We parked in front of the main entrance. Snow was falling in large flakes, settling on the windshield. Plan of action? Marcus asked. I looked toward the front door of the hotel. A uniformed doorman greeted incoming guests. Everything so damn normal, mundane, like no one's life was being destroyed inside. 3rd floor, room 312. I checked my gun. I want to look them in the eye. No nonsense, Landon. Marcus was dead serious. I'm going first. The hotel lobby was warm and cozy. A fireplace, soft armchairs, dimmed lights. The receptionist at the front desk recognized me. Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor. What can I do for you? I walked past him without stopping. Marcus said something to him, showing his badge. The elevator seemed unbearably slow. 3rd floor, a corridor lined with thick carpeting that muffled footsteps. Number 310, 311. I stopped in front of door number 312. From inside came muffled voices, laughter, her laughter, which I knew by heart. A male voice answered something. Marcus put a hand on my shoulder. Last chance to leave. Instead of answering, I knocked. The voices subsided. A few seconds later, the door opened. Bryce Hollingsworth stood in front of me with his shirt unbuttoned. His cocky smile disappeared when he realized who was in front of him. Mr. Mayor, he began. I punched him, hard, without swinging, right in the jaw. He flew back against the wall, clutching his face. There was a scream from the bedroom as Evelyn ran out into the living room of the suite, pulling up her robe as she ran. Landon. She went pale. I can explain everything. Really? I pulled crumpled printouts from my pocket, tossed them at her feet. Like this one, for example? Or this one? Or maybe these cute pictures? Hollingsworth started to rise. Marcus blocked his path. I wouldn't move if I were you, Mr. Hollingsworth. This is police brutality, the man spat out. You have no right to... Right? I laughed, and that laugh made Evelyn wince. Let's talk about rights. The rights of a husband to whom his wife swears fidelity while she herself sleeps with another? About the rights of a mayor who that bastard invites to charity events while he himself seduces his wife in his hotel? Landon, please. Evelyn took a step toward me, but I put my hand out, stopping her. Don't come any closer. My voice shook with rage. I've read your messages, all of them, every single one of them. Northern Lights is a nice touch. A special password for your meetings? Hollingsworth wiped the blood from his split lip. Look, let's discuss this like civilized people. Civilized? I took a step toward him, but Marcus held me back. You slept with my wife and smiled at me at official receptions. Is that civilized to you? Evelyn slumped down in her chair, covering her face with her hands. I didn't mean for it to come out like this. How did you want it to? I turned to her. That I'd never find out? To keep believing in your promises of a fresh start? In your I love you and let's be happy again? She looked up at me with tearful eyes. I'm confused. You've always been busy with work, with the city, with your responsibilities. And Bryce? Don't you dare. I pounded my fist on the wall in anger. Don't you dare make excuses for him. Mr. Thornton, Hollingsworth raised his voice again. I understand your feelings, but shut up. I looked him straight in the eye. Unless you want the IRS, the fire department, and every other city agency to find 100 violations in your business tomorrow. Are you threatening me? No, I promise. Marcus squeezed my shoulder tighter. Landon, that's enough. Let's go. I took one last look at Evelyn. She was sitting in a chair, small and pathetic, wearing a hastily wrapped robe. A chain glittered around her neck, a gift I'd given her last Christmas. I hope it was worth it, I said quietly. I hope your Northern Lights was worth the ruined family and 10 years of lies. Marcus and I left the room. Curious guests had already gathered in the hallway, attracted by the noise. Someone was filming on their phone. Disperse! Marcus barked, showing his badge. Police! In the elevator, I slumped against the wall, feeling the adrenaline release. My hands were shaking and my knuckles were sore. Let's go to my place, Marcus said as we stepped outside. You need a drink? I shook my head. No, take me to City Hall. Landon, I'm fine. I wasn't fine, and we both knew it. I have a budget meeting in an hour. The city needs its mayor, remember? Marcus looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. Okay, but I'll stay close by. The snow was still falling. The white flakes melted on the windshield, turning into droplets. Like the sky was crying with me. I spent the next 3 days at City Hall, barely leaving my office. I slept on the couch, eating coffee and sandwiches that Astrid brought. She didn't ask me anything, but I could see the sympathy in her eyes. News travels fast in a small town. I didn't go home. Evelyn called and wrote endless messages I deleted without reading. She came to City Hall, but I ordered her to stay away. My world had shrunk to the size of my office, where every detail reminded me of the betrayal. The photo on the desk, her favorite cup in the cabinet, the folders with the renovation project. Thursday morning, Reed Preston, my deputy, came in to see me. Landon, the IRS is requesting an unscheduled inspection of the Northern Lights Inn. It has something to do with… Yes, I didn't even look up from the paperwork. The inspection should be as thorough as possible. Send the fire department there too, and the sanitary inspection. But it looks like revenge? I finally looked at him. Exactly like that, and I don't care. Reed hesitantly shifted from foot to foot. Look, boss, I understand your feelings, but using your position of authority… Out, I said quietly. Just follow orders. By evening, the first reports were on my desk. Fire safety violations at the Northern Lights Inn, documentation problems, non-compliance with health codes. I read them with a kind of grim satisfaction, picturing Hollingsworth's face. Around 9, Marcus called. You're not answering your phone. Busy. Destroying Hollingsworth's business? I didn't say anything. His heavy breathing could be heard in the receiver. Landon, it's not you. You've always been an honest man, a man of principle. That honest, principled man was a cuckold. I chuckled bitterly. You know what the lousy part is? The whole town probably knew, saw them together whispering behind my back, and I believed her, like an idiot. Come to my place. We'll have a drink. We'll talk. Not tonight. I have work. I hung up the phone and pulled a bottle of whiskey from my desk drawer. My hands trembled slightly as I poured myself one. Outside the window, a blizzard was blowing. February in Alaska was always particularly harsh. New reports came in this morning. The building inspector found serious violations in the hotel addition. Environmentalists found problems with waste disposal. The taxman dug deeper and deeper, finding discrepancies in the documentation. I signed one order after another. Each signature brought a brief, painful satisfaction, as if each blow to Hollingsworth's business could lessen the pain of betrayal. At lunchtime, Astrid came in. "Mr. Thornton, maybe you should take a few days off." I looked at her, the tired woman who had known me for so many years. She'd been here when I'd first brought Evelyn to City Hall, when we announced our engagement, when we were planning the wedding. "I'm fine, Astrid." "No, you're not fine." She allowed herself to contradict me for the first time. "You're not sleeping, barely eating, and these tests, people are saying, let them talk." I jabbed at the papers again. "Is that it?" She hesitated in the doorway. "Mrs. Thornton left a letter for you." "Burn it." Toward evening, the owner of the local newspaper called. I'd known him for years. He was a friend of my father's. "Landon, my boy, there's a rumor going around about irregularities at the Northern Lights Inn. We're preparing a story." "Publish it," I interrupted. "All the details. Let people know the rot that's engulfed that damn hotel." The internal phone rang. Astrid said Marcus had arrived. I wanted to refuse, but he was already entering the office. "How are you, mate?" he said, sitting down across from me. "Thanks for your concern. I've seen the inspection reports and heard about the upcoming article." I shrugged. "It's all legal." "Legally?" Marcus stepped forward. "You're using your power for personal revenge. That's not the law. That's an abuse of power." "I don't care. You should care." He pounded his fist on the table. "You're the mayor, damn it. You swore an oath to serve this city, its people, and now you're letting a personal grudge." "Personal grudge?" I jumped up. "He slept with my wife, in his fucking hotel, and I'm supposed to what? Forgive and forget?" "No, but there are other ways to—" "Like what? Challenge him to a duel? Or maybe file for divorce and let them move on with their lives in peace while the whole town laughs behind my back?" Marcus stood up, walking over to me. "Look at you. You don't sleep, you don't eat, you live on coffee and whiskey. You're busy destroying other people's businesses. That's not you, Landon. You're above that." I turned back to the window. The snow had intensified, turning the city into a blurry white blur. I still love her. Hate myself for it, but I love her. Every morning I wake up and forget everything for a second. And then reality hits all over again. Marcus put a hand on my shoulder. "That's why you hide out here, drowning your pain in work and revenge. What's left for me to do? Move on with your life. Let go. Talk to her." I turned around sharply. "Talk? Talk about what? About how she swore her loyalty to me? How she promised me a fresh start? How—" His voice trailed off. There was a heavy silence in the study. Only the wind howled outside the window and the old clock on the wall ticked, a gift from my father when I became mayor. "Go home," Marcus finally said. "Take a shower, get a decent night's sleep. And tomorrow we'll talk about how to stop this inspection madness." I shook my head. I can't go back there. All those memories. "Then let's go to my place. The couch in the guest bedroom is still yours." I looked at the desk piled with reports and orders, at the picture of Evelyn and me smiling for the camera, at the bottle of whiskey, half empty. "Okay," I gave in. "Just give me another half hour. I need to finish the paperwork." Marcus nodded. 30 minutes. I'll wait downstairs." When he left, I pulled out my phone. 72 missed calls from Evelyn, 30 unread messages, 1 email. I opened my email, put my finger over the delete button. I couldn't. Maybe Marcus was right. Maybe it's time to stop. Stop this war that was destroying not only Hollingsworth, but myself? Outside the window, the blizzard continued to rage, blurring the lines between past and present. Somewhere out there, in that snowy chaos, was hidden the truth of who I'd become, and I wasn't sure I was ready to find out. Marcus's house had always seemed too big for a single man. 2 stories high, with a spacious porch and a 2-car garage, it stood on the edge of town, where the residential neighborhoods ended and the woods began. After his divorce from his wife 5 years ago, Marcus had lived here alone, though there was enough room for a large family. I lay on the couch in the guest bedroom, staring at the ceiling. I couldn't sleep. There was still a blizzard outside the window, and the wind was throwing handfuls of snow at the glass, as if trying to reach me. The phone screen flickered on the bedside table, another message from Evelyn. There was the muffled sound of the TV coming from the first floor. Marcus was awake too. I got up, threw on my friend's old robe, and went downstairs. "Can't sleep?" he asked, not taking his eyes off the screen. There was a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses on the table in front of him. "Neither are you." I sat back in my chair, accepting the proffered glass. The local news was playing on the screen. The announcer was saying something about an approaching storm, but I wasn't listening. My thoughts went back to that hotel room again and again, to the crumpled sheets, to the smell of her perfume, to the look on Hollingsworth's face when I caught them. "You know," Marcus said suddenly, turning off the TV, "when Sarah left me, I wanted revenge too. Track down that guy she traded me with. Maybe even shoot him." "Why didn't you?" "Because it wouldn't have brought her back, and it wouldn't have made me any happier." He was quiet. "Revenge is like poison. It seems empowering at first, but then it starts to eat away at you from the inside out." I took a big sip of whiskey. "Beautiful words, but you're a cop. You have to realize that some things can't go unpunished." "What about the people who work at the hotel? The maids, the cooks, the waiters. Your revenge on Hollingsworth could cost them their jobs." I clinked my glass this way and that. "Don't try to press your conscience." "Someone has to," Marcus pitched forward, "because you're not thinking straight right now. Revenge has clouded your judgment." "And how do you expect me to think?" I stood up abruptly, starting to pace around the room. "You know what I see every time I close my eyes? Them, together, in his damn hotel, and all those messages. 'Miss you. Can't wait to see you again.' 10 years of marriage, Mark. 10 fucking years." The glass flew into the wall, shattering into tiny shards. The whiskey left a dark stain on the light-colored wallpaper. "Sorry," I mumbled, sinking back into the chair. "I'll pay for the repairs." Marcus stood silently, fetching a broom and dustpan from the kitchen. While he cleaned up the splinters, I looked at my hands. They were trembling. "Remember what your father said?" Marcus asked, returning from the kitchen with a new glass. "Power tests a man just as much as trouble does. Right now you're undergoing both of those tests. You don't have to quote my father. You should. He was a good mayor and a good man. And you're the same way when you don't let your emotions take over." I closed my eyes. The image of Evelyn as she'd been on our wedding day came back to my mind. Happy, glowing with love. When had it all gone wrong? "I read her letter," I said quietly. "Tonight, before you came to City Hall." Marcus waited for me to continue. "She writes that she loves me, that she's confused, that Hollingsworth. He showed up when she was particularly lonely. Pretty words, pretty excuses." I chuckled bitterly. "You know what the lousy part is? Part of me wants to believe her. That's okay. Normal? Damn it, Mark, she betrayed me, lied to my face, and I still love her. I hate myself for it, but I love her." Marcus was silent for a long time, looking into his glass. "When Sarah left, I thought I'd never recover, that this pain would be with me forever. And you know what? It did stay. But over time I learned to live with it." "I don't want to learn to live with it." I stood up, walking to the window. "I want them both to pay, to feel at least some of the pain I feel." "And then what? When you ruin Hollingsworth's business, when you make them suffer, what then? Do you think that will bring you peace?" I leaned my forehead against the cold glass. Outside, the blizzard had subsided a little, and the starry sky was visible in the gaps between the snowdrifts. "Do you know why I carry a gun?" I suddenly asked. "Not because it's left over from the prosecutor's days, but because my father always said, a man must be ready to defend what he holds dear. But how can one defend oneself against the betrayal of a loved one?" "You can't," Marcus answered simply. "One can only get over it, and decide what you want to be afterward. A victim, a vigilante, or someone who found the strength to move on." I turned to him. "What if I don't know what I want to be?" "Then start with what you don't want to be." He stood up, putting a hand on my shoulder. "You're not a petty vigilante, Landon. Not a man who uses power to settle personal scores. I've known you for 30 years. You're better than that." His words hit exactly on target. I sank into my chair, feeling suddenly tired. What do you suggest? For starters, stop all these audits. Call the IRS, the fire department, everywhere. Tell them it was a mistake. And then? Then talk to Evelyn, not like a betrayed husband to an unfaithful wife, but man to man. Hear her out, really hear her out, and make a decision. What decision? One you can move on with, not out of revenge, not out of pride, but out of understanding what you really want. I glanced at my phone. Another unread message from Evelyn was flashing on the screen. What if I'm not ready for this conversation? Then wait. But don't turn your pain into a poison that will poison not only them, but yourself. Outside the window, the snowfall intensified again. White flakes swirled in the light of the street lamp, as if trying to form themselves into some pattern in answer to all my questions. You know, I said after a long silence, when I was a kid, my dad used to take me to City Hall. He said, "Remember, son, power is not given to tower over others, but to serve them." Marcus nodded. He was a wise man. Yes, I finished my whiskey. And he'd probably be turning over in his grave right now, watching his son use power for revenge. It's not too late to make things right. I pulled out my phone, found Reed's number. I'll cancel all the background checks first thing tomorrow morning. Good call. Marcus stood up. Now let's try to get some sleep. It's going to be a tough day tomorrow. Walking up to the guest bedroom, I felt drained. But for the first time in days, it wasn't that burning emptiness of despair and rage, but something else. Maybe the first step toward acceptance, or something new. I lay down without undressing. The phone on the nightstand blinked again, a new message from Evelyn. This time I opened it. We need to talk, please. Maybe Marcus was right. Maybe it's time not to get revenge, but just to talk. And decide how to move on. I wrote a short reply. Tomorrow, at the cafe by the lake, 2 o'clock. The snow continued to fall outside the window, covering the city with a white blanket. The cafe by the lake was our special place. It was where I'd proposed to Evelyn 10 years ago, where we'd celebrated every wedding anniversary, where we'd made plans for the future. Now the place seemed like a set from a past life. I arrived before the appointed time. I sat down at a table by the window, where I had a view of the snow-covered lake. The thermometer outside the window showed -28. The waitress who had known us for so many years brought my usual order, black coffee without sugar. "Waiting for Mrs. Thornton?" she asked with that special delicacy that comes from people who know someone else's distress. I simply nodded. What could I say? The whole town already knew what had happened. News travels faster than a blizzard in Anchorage. Evelyn came in at 2 o'clock sharp. She was wearing the same gray coat I gave her last winter. Her hair was in a simple bundle, and she wore a minimum of makeup on her face. She looked gaunt, shadows lingering under her eyes. "Hello?" she said quietly, sitting down across from me. I stared at her in silence. Where was the woman I'd fallen in love with? Where was the Evelyn who had sworn her eternal love to me? Now a stranger sat in front of me, casually putting on my wife's face. "I've canceled all the checks," I finally said. "Hollingsworth can sleep easy." She lowered her eyes. "That's noble of you." "Not noble, just the right thing to do." I sipped my coffee that had gone cold. "You wanted to talk. Talk." Evelyn unbuttoned her coat but didn't take it off. It was as if she was preparing to run away at any moment. "I'm leaving," she said simply. "To Phoenix. My sister's been calling for a long time." Something clenched inside, but I forced myself to remain calm. "When?" "The day after tomorrow. The ticket's already bought." Snow began to fall outside the window. Large flakes were slowly falling on the frozen lake where we had once skated and made plans for children. "You know," she continued after a pause, "I've been thinking a lot about how it all started, with Bryce. It wasn't like a passionate romance from the books. It was just loneliness. Constant, exhausting loneliness." "Don't," I held up my hand. "I don't want to hear the details." "No, listen." She looked me in the eye for the first time. "You need to know. I'm not making excuses. What I did is unforgivable. But you've always been so. Right. The perfect mayor, the perfect citizen, All business, all about the city, and I just wanted someone to see me as a woman, not the mayor's wife. And Hollingsworth saw? She flinched at the bitterness in my voice. He was attentive, called, wrote, asked how I felt, complimented me, and then it all started, and I couldn't stop. 10 years. I stared out the window, unable to see her face. 10 years I loved you, trusted you, and you, I loved you too, her voice trembled. And I do now, just differently. Different, I grinned bitterly. Different enough to sleep with Hollingsworth in his hotel? An elderly couple at a neighboring table turned around at my raised voice. Evelyn cringed in her chair. I'm sorry. I forced myself to keep my voice low. That was rude. No, you have a right to be angry. She rubbed her napkin with trembling fingers. I betrayed you. Our marriage. Everything we believed in. We were silent for a moment. The waitress approached the table, but sensing the atmosphere, she tactfully withdrew. What are you going to do in Phoenix? I asked, more to fill the silence. My sister is offering me a job at her design firm. A new life. A fresh start. What about the remodeling project? I've given all the materials to Reed. He'll find a replacement. Silence again. Outside the window, the blizzard was intensifying, turning the world into a white shroud. You know, Evelyn said suddenly, I often think back to our first year here. Remember how afraid I was of those frosts? How you taught me to cope with winter? I remember. You used to say, in Alaska, you either learn to live with the cold or you leave. She grinned unfunnily. I guess I never learned that. I looked at her. So familiar and so foreign at the same time. I remembered how she'd shivered from the cold in her first winter here. How I'd wrapped her in my jacket. How I'd rubbed her frozen hands. How I'd promised I'd always keep her warm. I'm sorry, she said quietly. Really sorry. You didn't deserve this. I know. I pulled out my wallet, placing the coffee money on the table. I hope you find what you're looking for in Phoenix. I stood up. She stood up too, awkwardly wrapping her coat around her. Landon, can you ever forgive me? I don't know, I answered honestly. Not right now. She nodded. I understand. Just know that no matter what, you were the best thing that ever happened in my life, and I'm going to regret ruining it all. Goodbye, Evie, I called her by her old nickname for the first time in the entire conversation. Be happy. Leaving the cafe, I stood in the parking lot for a long time, watching her get into a cab. The gray coat, the blonde hair, the confident movements, all so native and all so distant now. The blizzard had intensified, turning the air into a white swirl. Somewhere in this snowy chaos, my past was disappearing. My 10 years of life together, my dreams and plans were melting away. The phone in my pocket vibrated. Marcus. How'd it go? She's leaving. To Phoenix. A pause. Do you want me to come over? No. I got in the car, turned on the heat. I have a meeting at 3. The city needs its mayor, remember? Landon. I'm fine, I interrupted. I really am, just need some time. There was work ahead. A city that needed running. People who were counting on me. A life that didn't stop, even when your world was falling apart. I started the engine and pulled onto the road. The snow kept falling and falling. After all, in Alaska, you either learn to live with the cold or you leave. I chose the former.